Hi everyone, and welcome to Tuesday's Tips with Laurie. I am sad I missed last week. I was out of town, and I appreciate Jeanette filling in for me. But this week I'm back, and I'm so excited to share with you prevention of puckering. How many of you have had an embroidery project you're working on and it started puckering? And that's no good, it's no fun, especially the fabric that you might waste. So what I'd like to do is talk about prevention of puckering. So how to help it before you actually do that stitch out that's heavy. So if you look at a stitch out and you can see that there's going to be some heavy satin stitching, there's going to be a lot of different stitches that are going on that are going to be more of a heavy type stitching. Make sure that you've already prepped your design and your fabric with the proper items that will help keep you from puckering. So to start with, this project is something that is made in the hoop, but it has like a heavy feel to it, and it's okay if it's stiff. It's not something you want to have pliable because you want it to hold its shape. So I would recommend a heavy cutaway stabilizer. This is a really thick one. Like I've tried tearing this and I can't even tear it. It's a really good heavy stabilizer. So we want to use a heavy stabilizer, but in addition to that, I know we've mentioned before Shape Flex. There's different products out there. Basically, if you find something that's a fabric with adhesive on one side, then you can actually iron it to your fabric, and you would iron it to the back side of your fabric and treat it as if it's part of the fabric. And then you would put that that fabric down in the hoop when you're stitching it out, and it's already attached to the fabric. And as you can see, it's really durable, but yet it's super pliable. This is just a really thin piece of fabric, but it's got these fibers in it that are really strong. And then it's got the adhesive, so it adheres to your fabric before you start your project. Make sure you put it on before you start your project and not after. It really won't help you afterwards. So we're going to keep the Shape Flex out, and I'm going to show you a different one. So for example, here we have a hoop, and you can see my fabric piece isn't quite big enough to hoop in here. So for those of you that have done Hello Sunshine, Broomhilda, any of those, to save on fabric, you don't need to hoop the entire hoop with fabric. You would have a lot of waste. So this is a different method, and we're going to use tearaway. So here I've got something that's already got tearaway on it. This is a cute little stitch out. You can see it stitched out really well because we used a really heavy tearaway stabilizer. But when we're finished, you can see the stabilizer tears right off, even though it was a heavy stabilizer, and you can peel it right from the inside out. And then it's nice and pliable. So if you were to put this in your quilt, it's a soft quilt. It's not a really stiff quilt because we want it to feel, something fun and soft. We don't want it to be really stiff. So this also has the Shape Flex on the back of it. So anytime I'm doing a heavy stitch out there again, I would take the Shape Flex, and I'll show you right here on this fabric. You can see that I've got the Shape Flex on the back of this fabric, and you can still see it doesn't make it stiff. It's still very pliable. Once I put and you want to use a heavyweight tearaway, not a tearaway that's going to rip so easily the minute there's stitching happening. So you can kind of maybe hear, can you hear that? That's really a thick tearaway. And I hoop the tearaway first, then I put my Shape Flex on the back of my fabric second. Then I take this and I taped it down in the hoop. And then a lot of the machines, not all machines, but a lot of your machines out there will add a basting box. I would highly recommend add that basting box. It's to your advantage. And then when you stitch this out, can you see how flat this is? It didn't pucker or anything. And that's a really heavy stitch out on some of these areas. And so you can see, then you just unpick the basting box and you've got a really nice looking embroidery, no puckering happening. So you ask, well, what if I don't have a machine that has that basting box? That's not a problem. So I took this heavy stabilizer that's the tearaway. I can show you right here. You can tear it pretty easily, but yet it's really strong in the middle, and it's strong that way. So what I've done is I've taken my stabilizer and I folded it in half this way, and I folded it in half this way, and since it's a tearaway, it will crease. And I made creases on it. Then I took my piece of fabric that I had cut. I cut this one at 6.5 by 8.5 because I was gonna make one of these cupcakes, and you can see it'll easily fit in the middle of that. And then I took Shape Flex and I put Shape Flex on the back of this piece of fabric, and then I taped it down to the stabilizer, and I also creased my fabric so that my fabric lines line up with the creases in my stabilizer. Then I know that it's in the very center, and I know that my embroidery design will be right in the middle. Once I had the stabilizer, the Shape Flex on the back of my fabric placed in the middle and aligned, I taped it down and I took it to a sewing machine, and I simply sewed a basting stitch 3/4 of an inch around the whole outside edge. So it has its basting box. It's stitched in white thread, but you can see the white thread right there. That's my basting box. So now I'm ready to put this in my hoop, and I know it'll be centered because you get your hoop, and your hoop has the crosshairs that you can use. So I would just simply then hoop this right into my hoop with the centered, and I won't, to save on time, I won't actually spend time doing that, but you can see that, even though it doesn't catch in the hoop, the fabric, it won't pucker because it's already basted down, and it's got the Shape Flex on the back, and I've used some durable, strong tearaway fabric. And you can see this is the tearaway stabilizer. You can see that this is tearaway as well. And that's how I would go about making sure that you don't have any puckers. Just remember the 3 things. Stabilizer, that is a really good durable stabilizer for what your project is going to need. Second would be the Shape Flex. Put that on the back. And the third thing would be use a basting box if you have one, or you can make a basting box ahead of time. And tape. I always use the tape. It's just another way of stabilizing that fabric and reinforcing that. So hopefully that your projects will turn out nice and smooth and no puckering. That's what our goal is, correct?
Yeah.
All right. Well, thank you so much for tuning in.
Questions,
oh, absolutely.
Actually. What is the name of the stabilizer you put down second on the back of your work?
That's a great question. It comes under the name Shape Flex, so you can look it up at Shape Flex. There are some other products out there that are similar to Shape Flex, but the reason I like the Shape Flex, it's very lightweight, and like you see, it's very, very pliable and very easy to use, so it's not going to make your needle work any harder to get through both layers of fabric, because if you start adding lots of fabric and heavy stabilizer, that's a little bit more for your machine to go through. So that's what I would recommend.
Yeah. Is Shape Flex an interfacing sold by Pellon?
Yes.
Yes, it is.
Yes, it is.
Yep.
That's a great question.
And for those that haven't used stabilizer before, do you want to show them which side to iron and kind of how that works?
Sure.
You can just take an up close of the...
So we'll take an up close of this. So if I were cutting, and this were my piece of fabric, and I were cutting a piece of Pellon, or the Shape Flex, I would put it on and I would cut it right about here, so it's shorter than your fabric, just by a little ways. The reason for that is I don't want this adhesive on my ironing board or on my iron, and I'm sure you wouldn't want that either. If this is a smaller piece, no.
So it is fusible.
It's fusible, and it fuses quite easily. It's not like you have to hold it for 20 or 30 seconds. Just a few seconds until you feel it adhered. I'll pull this back, for example. You can see I can peel it back off if I needed to. Can you see that? But you can see that it's adhered on with the iron. And the shape flex here, you can see I just a hair smaller, and then you'll iron it. Make sure that you put the side, you can feel on the shape flex, you can feel the rough, feels like sandpaper.
I can see it. Oh yeah.
It feels like sandpaper on this one side, and this other side it feels smooth because it's a really soft fabric on the other side. And so you'll want the sandpaper side on the back side of your fabric, just like that. And then I would probably cut this right about here, and I would iron that on and make that part of your fabric. And then you would, of course, that's where you'd put the fabric down on your stabilizer, tape it, and then add that basting box if you want, or you can sew it on your sewing machine before you hoop it.
Oh, great.
And any other questions?
Is there a certain brand of heavy tearaway?
No, I found 3 or 4 brands that are really good. This is, I'll go back to the cutaway. If you can feel, it's got some good fibrous to it. Fibrous is a good thing. And if I can't rip it, then I know that I've got a good piece of stabilizer. A lot of your major brands out there are going to have really good heavyweight stabilizer. If you just look up heavy weight, that's for the cutaway. And there is a heavy, medium, and light tearaway. I like to use the heavy tearaway, but this one right here is a medium tearaway. I actually wouldn't, unless you're doing a light stitching, I wouldn't recommend the light tearaway, but a medium or a heavy tearaway. So look for those 2 words. And you can see it's got strength to it, but you still can rip it. That's so key on tearaway stabilizer. So if they have samples, a lot of places will give you or have samples out that you can look at. If they don't, maybe ask your store or your shop that you're getting it from, and they should be able to recommend a good weight of stabilizer for you. And another note, if you're doing this and that you wanted to put it on a tea towel, for example, and you wanted wash away stabilizer, if it's a heavy stitch out, I always double my stabilizer on the wash away. So I would not worry about the shape flex, but double the water soluble stabilizer on the back of something that you wanted it to wash out of. So let's say this was on a little tea towel, and you're going to be washing that tea towel, right? That's so cute. But it might get a little bit dirty. So if you throw it in the wash, then you want it to not have anything on the back of it. That's where I would use a water soluble stabilizer, but because it's a heavy stitch out, double it. I always double my water soluble stabilizer just for that purpose. So the stitches and everything will come out nice and smooth.
Okay, that's a great tip. Okay, I think we have 2 more questions.
Oh, you bet.
Do you cover the whole block area with shape flex, or just the embroidered item? So which blocks do you use shape flex for?
I only use shape flex on the blocks that have a heavy stitch out. If it's something that's smaller, it's lightweight. The reason I did it on these is this cherry is a complete fill stitch. You can see this cherry down here. It's a complete fill stitch here, here. This is a nice, heavy, thick satin stitch. So I used it on the back of this, and I will, trim this to whatever size I want it to be, but the shape flex will stay inside of that. If I were doing something that was just a few words or a small applique, and it's just a single and there's not all this extra stitching, then I would forego the shape flex. So I wouldn't put shape flex on the back of everything, but definitely on a lot of your heavy satin stitches, especially wording. Anything that has wording like this, I always use shape flex. And I use it, if I were doing the pennant, I would put shape flex on just this part of the fabric. The top piece, which is the back piece, you don't need to have shape flex on that part. So just really underneath where you're going to be stitching, but make sure that it's caught in the seams, or that the shape flex is, for example, the basting box has to catch all that shape flex, or your shape flex isn't really going to work for you. So anywhere that the basting box would go, you would have shape flex behind that. Because if you don't have your shape flex past that, then it's going to just kind of suck in a little bit with the fabric. But that's part of the strength of the stabilizer. The shape flex in the fabric is holding that in place.
Okay,
So there was another question?
Yep, one more. Does the shape flex stay on? So once you iron it, if you wash it, how does it stay on?
Once it is, that's a great question. Once you've got your stabilizer, and you can see how I pulled it off up here, but once it's sewn in, so it's not going to come off the back of this at all. And if you're sewing this into a project, say it's a quilt block, that's why you want to make sure your shape flex is the same size as your fabric piece, because it will be sewn into the quilt block, and once it's sewn in, it's just like a piece of fabric. It's not going to come out.
Perfect.
So that's a great question. It's not going to be a tear away or something like a stabilizer.
Yeah.
It will stay right with your fabric once it's stitched down together. The adhesive part is just to keep it held together, and then once you've got your stitching done, it's going to stay in there. It won't come out.
Okay.
Any other questions?
I think that's it. We'll answer any other questions in the comments if you have them, so keep asking. And thanks.
That's great. Thank you, and we'll see you next week.